That's right, Anderson. We're standing again in the Capitol Rotunda. Right over behind me is where Statuary Hall is. That is where you see the pictures right there of John Kerry and other senators inside waiting for the president. And we're, in fact, waiting for the president ourselves. He should walk by us pretty much any minute. You saw him earlier doing some official signing some important things, like officially nominating some new members he hopes will be new members of his cabinet. And so we're waiting for him to walk by here and go into this lunch. One interesting little anecdote is that, and I mentioned this earlier in our programming, but I think it's worth repeating, that 4 years ago, the president, according to the Senate curator who watched him during most of the lunch, he didn't eat. He instead was kind of walking around from table to table, greeting people, socializing, which is kind of ironic now because over the past 4 years, especially over the past maybe few months, when things have gotten really, really intensely partisan here, the president's been criticized for not socializing enough, not reaching out enough. So we'll see if he does the same thing at this lunch, if he sits down and eats and keeps to himself, or he actually goes around the room and shakes hands with all of the Democrats and Republicans and Supreme Court justices and other members of the exclusive guest list that are going to be at this lunch.
Yeah, Dana, talk about this lunch. I mean, who is it? Who's invited? Here's the president and the vice president. Vice president entering the room. Dana, who is invited to this lunch? It's not all members of the Senate.
Not at all. 220 tickets, that's all. So some of the most senior members of the Senate are invited, the leadership of the House and the Senate, some of the most senior members of the House, select members of the House. Also, as I said, members of the Supreme Court, the Joint Chiefs are invited. Sorry, I'm looking up. You know what, I'm going to... Just looking over here because I believe the president is about to walk by. I see his official photographer, so he should come any minute. And here they come. Here comes President Obama and Mrs. Obama going into their lunch. And you see that he is escorted, Anderson, by some of the Senate folks who really keep the Senate running, like the Sergeant-at-Arms, but also Senator Chuck Schumer, who you saw MC the earlier ceremony. He's the chairman of the inaugural committee. He's going to be with him all day. Let's listen.
No, I can do it for a moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, Barack H. Obama, and Mrs. Obama, accompanied by Senator Charles E. Schumer and Mrs. Schumer.
And Dan, I know Senator Schumer from New York, who organized this luncheon, was responsible for the menu. He wanted to make sure most of the items on the menu were from New York. I think they're apples from upstate New York. I understand he tried to get Long Island duck, but instead they've ended up with bison from out of state.
That's right. The reason that happened is because they actually have this very interesting tradition where the spouses of the members of the Joint Inaugural Committee actually do a tasting, and they tasted the duck, and they said, according to Schumer, it just was kind of gross, so they decided to go do to bison. Let's listen.
Okay, Mr. President. What am I supposed to do? Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, honored guests, my colleagues on the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies and I are pleased to welcome you to today's inaugural luncheon. In this historic room, we look around at the 35 statues representing men and women. Well, one woman. Thank you, Illinois and Senator Durbin, for the statue of Frances Willard, though I feel obligated to note that she was born in Rochester, New York. Thankfully, she will soon have company when Rosa Parks completes her journey from the back of the bus to the front of Statuary Hall later this year. Now we look around and remember the men and women who helped define our nation. They, like us, faced obstacles, and they, like us, worked hard to move this country forward. Here in this hall, 4 presidents took the oath of office. Here, Abraham Lincoln served his single term in Congress, and John Quincy Adams, the only former president to return to serve in the House, spoke out against slavery. Today, we also remember an event that took place outside this building, but reverberated within. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s March on Washington, which spurred passage of the historic civil rights laws. We're honored to have with us a colleague, Congressman John Lewis, who was a speaker at that historic march. Congressman Lewis's life exemplifies the courage and sacrifice that have made our nation great. John, please stand and take a bow so we all can recognize you. Behind us, the painting we have chosen for this luncheon is Niagara Falls, painted in 1856 by Ferdinand Richard. For me, as a New Yorker, Niagara Falls never fails to inspire a tremendous awe for the natural beauty of our great country. Then and now, the mighty falls symbolize the grandeur, power, and possibility of America. And I want to thank my former Senate partner, our great Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, for allowing us to borrow this beautiful painting from the State Department collection. But frankly, we aren't here for the paintings, we're here for the food. And while the theme of today's ceremony is faith in America's future, today's menu could be labeled Faith in America's Food. From the New England lobster to the heirloom vegetables to the South Dakota bison to the wonderful New York wines, each element was carefully chosen and expertly prepared. It was actually chosen by the tasting committee, which consisted